The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena.
Thanks, everybody. That's, sort of the running joke. I am almost 48. I look 38, and I feel 58. So, we'll try and get this up and running here. Just turned off on me. But anyway, we'll start with something fun. If everybody can just do this. Now, if you picture this, this is the Canadian debt. Clicking second after second, hour after hour, day after day. This does not sleep. This does not eat. This just keeps on ticking away. Day after day, hour after hour. And part of the challenge with this is recently our fearless leader, Prime Minister Carney, announced that he wasn't going to have a budget. And I think the Taxpayers Association scared him into actually producing a budget. But the last I heard before he was voted in as Prime Minister, it was a $250 billion deficit that he wanted to create. And so
to balance the operating.
the budget balances itself. But the thing is, that money comes from somewhere. It's printed effectively out of thin air. And we've gotten to a place in the Western world, this is not just exclusive to Canada, but the United States is probably the worst offender of a lot of this, but it happens a lot in Europe as well. And it's a term called fiscal dominance, where you can no longer pay for all the social programs, all the goodies, all the ESG, all the rainbow sidewalks without printing currency. And when you get to a point where you actually have to print the currency to pay for the debt, that's called fiscal dominance. And it's a situation where every dollar saved previously gradually dwindles away before it. So now, specifically during COVID, and just shortly after COVID, we really saw inflation take off. You know, and the governments usually try and do a pretty good job of trying to hide inflation, but they printed so much currency in the background, it was very hard to hide. So you saw it in housing prices. We continue to see it in food prices. You see it in insurance. You see it in fuel. You know, I just filled up at the pump today. That, removal of the carbon tax didn't last very long, did it? You know, it went down to about $1.15 a liter. Now it's back up at $1.40. That didn't last very long, did it? Even though oil is hovering around $60, where it's lower than it's been in a long time, the prices at the pump get felt. So it's hiding out there. And so the governments get themselves into this position where they actually have to continue to print, and they continue to have these financial games, or as I like to call them, financial fudgery, that what they do is they can't outright come and tax the people, so they actually steal it through inflation. So every other dollar that's produced out there in the past basically reduces in value because of all this financial fudgery, and it's become so big and so egregious, they have to do these financial games, otherwise the people notice too quickly. But there's people like me out there that can track and follow it and point fingers at them and basically suggest that's going to be inflationary, that's going to devalue everybody's currency, and basically that's taxation without representation, and it's theft in my mind. So there's when I talk about this financial fudgery, there's four main things that I see. I'm just going to mention three of them, and then I'm going to go in depth to one of them this evening. Most of them are very complicated. I'll try and barrage me with questions. I've got some slides to try and help track this information. We're recording this. If you've got some interest, relook at it type thing if you really want to understand it. But at the end of the day, they're all inflationary, and they're all stealing basically your savings that you've worked so hard for 30, 40, 50 years, effectively just whittled away through inflation. So one of the ways that they do this financial fudgery is quantitative easing. And you may have heard this term before. And really what it is central banks, so the Bank of Canada, buying the government's debt. And so the government says, hey, I have this really great wind farm that I want to produce, and but we don't have any money, So we're going to sell these bonds into the market. But part of the problem is this is challenged throughout the Western world now, is that when these Western governments go to sell these bonds, nobody wants anything to do with it. Because the inflation is too high, they understand that the value of that bond is not going to be worth what it is in 10 years from now that it is today. And so what happens actually in the marketplace is the yields rise on that. So it's inverse to what you would think. So if a bond is selling, a 10-year bond is selling for, say, 3% or something like that, and then the general market says, no, we're not interested in that bond, the yield rises on it. So the bond actually becomes more expensive for the government to sustain. And what you need to understand is that the bond must find a buyer. It must. So it goes out into the market, and basically the price or the yield keeps on rising until it actually finds a buyer. So now quantitative easing is the actual central bank of a country going in and buying that debt to keep the cost down. Make sense? Follow me so far? So this is a trick that specifically in the great financial crisis in the States in 2008, they bought a ton of outstanding debt to try and keep the yields lower. So it's not inflationary if it's caught up in the banking system. But what happened during the COVID crisis was that, or anti-crisis, whatever you want to call it, is they had to buy this debt. The central bank bought the debt of the government of Canada, but what they did is they started sending out checks. So they sent out checks for people to sit at home. They sent out checks for people to keep their businesses closed. They sent out checks for people to watch Netflix. And that is highly inflationary. So the money is actually escaping the banking system and getting out into the real economy and becomes highly inflationary. So that's one of the tools that they use to basically cover their butts to try and pay for all these goodies that they have, but try and fool the people into thinking it. So people need to understand. I don't think there's probably any trouble in this room, but they need to understand anytime the government spends the money, it has to come from somewhere, whether it's from taxes or from devaluation of every other single dollar out there. It has to come from somewhere. So another financial piece of fudgery that they do is yield curve control. So this is similar to quantitative easing, where the central bank is actually buying the debt of the government. Japan is famous for yield curve control, where they've put a cap on their rates and basically said, we will pay no more than 25 basis points or 0.25% on our debt. And they just say, nope, we're not paying any more than that. It works a lot better in Japan just because there's a lot of citizens of Japan that they're a very closed society. So basically their citizens just take it on the chin. If they had debt outside of Japan or in significant amounts, the market wouldn't have it. They would basically say, no, you're going to be a very inflationary, you're just going to keep on printing currency, the yield would rise. But they get away with it in Japan. We can't get away with that, something like that in Western Canada or in Canada or in the Western world. So a third piece of financial fudgery is very prevalent in Alberta and exactly what Kurt was talking about, where they specifically seem to be targeting Alberta's resources. It's a concept called green and blue bonds, green or blue bonds. And so what they do is somewhere in the back room, they say, hey, we want to sell these bonds, and there's someone out there that says, yeah, we'll buy those bonds, but we need collateral to be able to do that. And so somebody pledges something of value to these bondholders that they actually have, and they don't actually need the government's authority to be able to do something like this. And so Do you happen to know a province that is extremely resource rich that might have a ton of collateral that somebody might use to leverage against?
Can't think of one.
Can't think of one? Okay. Well, this concept of green and blue bonds, it was first come about where they did it on a smaller scale, where a big oil company like Suncor would basically say, hey, we need a loan to build this refinery or whatever it is. And then they'd go to the bank and say, hey, we want to build this refinery. The bank would say, hey, as long as you pledge some assets, then we can be able to do that. Suncor goes, I don't have any assets right now. Can we pledge the reserves that are actually in the ground? And so that didn't start all that long ago. Maybe it was 20 years ago they actually were able to allocate these reserves as actual capital. And so some government agency got the great idea that, hey, why don't we pledge these assets, say something like $20 trillion worth of oil sands reserve, and we can sell these bonds, and as long as we pay the interest on these bonds, then there's not going to be a problem. So enter somebody like Mark Carney that would understand something like this with green and blue bonds. And you, as mentioned, you have to be able to pay the interest on the debt. And you need a mechanism to basically pay for that. And wouldn't you know it, something like the carbon tax enters. Well, a lot of people called foul on the actual individual personal carbon tax, but there's very willing industry out there that's willing to pay for these carbon taxes. So not only do you have these pledged assets now, but you also have a mechanism to pay for them with the industrial carbon tax that it seems that the oil companies are all too willing to pay. And you get a government in place that's willing to go out on a limb to basically sell these bonds. And you've effectively sold out your country when you do something like that. And if you don't think something like this hasn't happened before, I encourage you to read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And it's a book where they've done this type of thing in the past. Venezuela is a great example of where they pledge all this collateral that's in the ground, they sell them a bunch of infrastructure, and get them effectively into debt slavery. And so something like this is very possible in the world today.
Are you saying the federal government's doing this right now, or the Alberta government?
I'm not sure, but the thing is that this is something that could do. I don't have any proof of it at this point. But the thing is, this is things that happen in backdoor scenes, and this is why they want Alberta. Something that I'm a little more certain on is a concept. Now my computer's gone off again. Sorry about that. I'll take a question while I'm at it.
Not really a question, just an observation. The reason the resource companies, the private companies are willing to do this is because they can get their infrastructure built and their production underway at no risk. The only risk is the owner of the resource, which is the citizens of Alberta.
Correct, yeah. So basically, if you didn't hear that in the back, it's that these oil companies need favors to build these infrastructure projects, so that they're all too willing to do something like this. Here, just let me put down the mic for a second.
I'm just going to connect the second microphone because I think there's a lot of questions going on there. Okay, sure. Just going to give me your closing help. Connect the second microphone so you can ask questions and
So even if we separate, if the federal government...
So this next concept that I'm going to be talking about financial fudgery, is when Kurt actually contacted me about this. I wrote a paper to the Alberta government, and I have on good knowledge that it did get to the inner circle of the Premier's office of what I think is sort of happening in the world today. This paper's called Battle for the Soul of Alberta, the Looney dollar system. I based it off a lot of work that Tom Luongo has done. He calls this the maple dollar system. It's a complicated concept, but hopefully we can muddle through it here. And as mentioned, if you want to sort of understand it better, I do have a paper out there on it, as well as the slide deck. We can get to people through Kurt, or it'll be online somewhere. So the Looney dollar system. Sorry, having technical difficulties here. There's a concept in the world right now that's called the Eurodollar system, and this is sort of what I based this information off of. And back about 50, 60, 70 years ago is when the real concept of what's called the Eurodollar system was created. And effectively all the Eurodollar system is creation of U.S. debt outside of the U.S. And so it's not done within the U.S. and it's not sanctioned by anybody in the U.S. And it's called the Eurodollar system because mainly they've used it in Europe. And I think when they first started this system, it didn't really have any nefarious implications at that point. But I'll describe how it's turned into this beast of an issue that Trump will not stand for. So, as mentioned, Eurodollar system is the creation of U.S. dollars outside of the United States. So how do you do that? You say you're over in Germany or something like that, and you need U.S. dollars. So you need U.S. dollars to purchase oil because oil is denominated in dollars, U.S. dollars around the world, and you need access to U.S. dollars. And so if Germany doesn't have any U.S. dollars, they basically create them, and they issue a note in debt that basically says, we are denominating U.S. debt within Germany. So sounds a little fudgery already, right? So it's U.S. dollar debt that's created outside of the U.S. And so that happened over the past 50, 60, 70 years to the point where the Eurodollar system is actually 20 times the size of the U.S. dollar system. So when you get to that point, all of a sudden you can start manipulating the currency, the underlying currency, the U.S. dollar. So when you're a country that has a bunch of social programs, you have a bunch of goodies that you want to be able to provide your citizens, like most of the countries in Europe, what you want to do is basically issue as much debt as possible to prop up the system. And to be able to pay for it, part of the problem is that those interest rates on that debt need to be kept down as low as possible. Otherwise, you won't be able to pay for it through taxes of your citizens. And so the European Union and a lot of countries over in Europe have an ingrained interest to try and tamp down on that price of the US dollars. And so usually, and if you follow the financial markets closely enough, it's usually the European countries that are screaming at the US to drop their interest rates. And the reason is because they need access to those US dollars. So something changed in July of 2023. The current chair of the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank in the United States, Jerome Powell, was a big pusher to move from a system called LIBOR, the London Inter-Offer Bank Rate, to SOFR, the Secured Overnight Funding Rate. And so there's a big difference between these two. One's called LIBOR, one's called SOFR. LIBOR, London. SOFR in the United States. So London used to be, and maybe is considered still, one of the biggest financial hubs in the world. And so they were actually picking the cost of the US dollar over in London. And that's really important because London has this rule in it that's called infinite rehypothecation. And infinite rehypothecation just means you can basically leverage something as many times as you can. So say you had a house, and you go to the bank, and you basically say, hey, can I get a HELOC on my house? And they go, sure, here you go. And then you go to the next bank and go, hey, can I get a HELOC on my house? And they go, sure. And the next bank, HELOC, yes. And so you can't do that as an individual citizen because you'd look at the legal structure and say, hey, no, you've got this loan over here. You can't take on another loan. That doesn't apply in London. So you can actually continue to rehypothecate all this debt over and over and over again on one little piece of collateral, say in this case like a house, or perhaps a $20 trillion oil sands collateral. So what happened with the movement away from LIBOR to SOFR, to the US system, is basically the Trump administration saying, no, no more. We are not going to let some European nation dictate the price of US dollars anymore. And so if you've been following things closely in the financial market, that's when things really started to blow up, was when that movement happened from the LIBOR rate to the SOFR rate in the US, where the US now has control over their US dollars. Let's see if I can get this here. Yeah, there will be.
Is that why London was so irritated over the last year and a half?
Well, it's very interesting. You're absolutely right. That's why London has been very irritated over the last couple of years. And there's an interesting chain of events as well that's happened. Here, I'll just try and get this up and running. March 9th, 2025, Carney voted in by 150,000 Liberals. They disqualified 250,000 actual voting members of the Liberal Party. So that's, interesting in its own right.
Is it okay?
Yeah. March 10th, the Department of Finance issues a statement about Canada issuing U.S.-denominated debt. March 11th, Canada issues the U.S.-denominated debt. March 14th, Carney is sworn in. March 17th, 3 days later, after you're sworn in, Carney goes and meets with the King and Keir Starmer, who's the Prime Minister of the UK, as well as he met with Macron, who's the Prime Minister of France. Does that sound like somebody that has the best interest of Canadians is running over to London? And if you don't know much about Mark Carney, he used to be the chair of the Bank of England. So he used to be the governor of the Bank of England. So he understands how this works. He understands infinite rehypothecation. And he understands how collateral and the system works. And I find it really interesting that the King came in. Was it just yesterday that was in Parliament? Today? Yeah. Anyway. So this is where it might be a little difficult to see the slides, but we'll give it a shot anyway. So there's the European country over there, and this is effectively a slide on how what I described, the Eurodollar system, works. So the U.S. down there in my right-hand corner sends trade surpluses to European countries. They pay these coupon payments through the European companies to the Bank of England and effectively paid the debt back in U.S. dollars. And so they do this through the Bank of England so they can infinitely rehypothecate this these dollars. And so effectively when you can do that, you have control over the US dollar throughout the system. And basically you can manipulate the price of US dollars throughout the system. So why do you think Europe is in the crosshairs of the trade tariffs? It's exactly for this reason, is because Trump understands this, Bessent understands this. Bessent's the Treasury Secretary of the United States. J.D. Vance understands this, and Jerome Powell, who's the chair of the Federal Reserve, understands this. And the way to stop the Eurodollar system from happening is cutting off access to US dollars so they cannot perpetuate the system. So now, Trump will not stand by and allow the control of the pricing of the US dollar to continue. He basically cut them off by moving from from LIBOR over to SOFR, basically saying, no, we determine the price of US dollars. And he cut them off through tariffs, or he's trying to cut them off through tariffs, and basically saying, we're not going to give you access to US dollars anymore. And basically, so what he's doing is taking control of the US dollar system again, is effectively what he does. Now, enter Canada and the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney. Effectively trying to do the same thing is there's all these oil companies, especially in Alberta, that sell their product in US dollars. The majority of it, 80% of it, goes to the United States, and they pay us in US dollars. Those US dollars end up in the banking system to the Bank of Canada, and then they can pay for this debt issued that denominated in US debt. What they most recently did was issued at March 10th, 2025. And so it wasn't a sizable amount that they issued in US debt. It was only something like $3.5 billion with a B that they actually issued in US denominated Canadian debt. But what they do is they send it over to the Bank of London, infinitely rehypothecate it, and they turn that $3 billion into $3 trillion. And with something like $3 trillion, you can actually manipulate the price of the US dollar. So now, the big problem here, especially for Canadians, is the fact that the Canadian dollar is much smaller than the euro. And so it will feel the effects much sooner than something like the euro, which is a big, big market. And so I sent all this information to Premier Smith's office, seeing sort of what was going to happen. And basically, if you want to stop this from happening, you basically have to cut off the flow of US dollars. And part of the problem is that all this oil sold to the United States, they're going to send you dollars. And so you have to be able to sort of pinch that point and not get US dollars into the system. So my idea was actually to, rather than get paid in US dollars, get paid in gold. And basically pay those reserves in gold. What happened was really interesting. About 3 days later, after I assumed that the Premier's office got a hold of this information, she announced that she's going to start accepting royalty payments in bitumen versus in US dollars, which would do the same thing. What you're trying to do is basically take the US dollars out of the Canadian commercial banking system, is what you're trying to do. I know there's been contact with the State Department down in the United States, where they love this idea, where we actually keep our reserves from Alberta oil in the United States in the form of gold or in bitumen. So it's effectively, they understand this in the United States. Trump is not going to be playing games, and he will not let this system perpetuate. And so we can either be on the right side of this thing, or we can be on the wrong side of this thing. So at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is completely cut off the flow of US dollars through the commercial banking system so they cannot perpetuate this Looney dollar system or Maple dollar system within Canada. And Alberta is a key piece of this because 80% of the trade deficit with the United States is because of oil and gas in Alberta. And so, frankly, Alberta is a linchpin to a lot of things that are happening in the world today. My understanding is the Trump administration understands this. I would think that Mark Carney understands this, and just through his actions, I'm pretty certain he does, just the way he's transacting with the UK and the European Union the way he is. So it's really what I had to talk about today. A lot of these slides will put it better in perspective if you're not following what's happening here. There's also that paper out there that's called the Looney dollar system, and will hopefully explain things a little bit better than I can give it justice for. So happy to take questions.
I was just going to say, that's actually treasonous, because in taking so many dollars, we're devaluing the Canadian dollar, which is already down there far enough. Like, that's the only word I can think of right now is screwing Canada big time.
Yeah, eventually, because we're, like I mentioned before, because the Canadian dollar, the Looney, is so much smaller than the euro, we'll start feeling impacts through inflation much sooner than the Europeans ever would. So,
does the size of the Canadian dollar float relative to the American dollar float have any impact on this?
yeah, so I think there's what's called a DXY, the Dixie, and really what it is, it's just how the U.S. dollar is denominated. So currencies are all just relative. So the Canadian dollar is just relative to the U.S. dollar. The euro is just relative to the Canadian dollar. And the Dixie is sort of the backbone of the whole system, the U.S. denominated debt. And it's made up with, the price is denominated by the makeup of other currencies. So the euro makes up about 60% of the Dixie. So it's a huge portion of the Dixie. There's also the Japanese yen that's in there. There's the Swiss franc, the Canadian dollar, which has about 6% of the makeup of U.S. dollars. So we're dealing with something and pushing something. You're pushing an elephant through the eye of a needle, and compared to from something that's 10 times bigger in the euro and 10 times smaller in the Looney.
I got two questions, okay?
Sure.
What's the impact of the Chinese yuan on this as they try to get themselves into a major trading position?
So the Chinese yuan doesn't make up any part of the Dixie. So they've been a lot like Japan, where they've just stayed internal to themselves. But the BRICS nations, for the past number of years, seem to be trying to set up something outside of the U.S. system. So a big impetus of them thinking about this, and they've been sort of moving away from the U.S. dollar system since about 2014. So in 2014, the Chinese held about $1.2 trillion of U.S. debt, and while they've been gradually letting it roll off, and so they only hold about $800 billion in U.S. debt now. And the reason being is when there's a country like the U.S. printing 8% new digits on a screen every year to basically devalue the currency, and your bond is only paying 4%, you're losing 4% every year on that. And so they've gradually been moving away from this. And it's really important to understand, do what they do, not what they say. And so what have central banks around the world been doing? China since 2014, Russia since the Ukraine war started, they've been buying gold. And so they've been gradually moving away from the U.S. dollar. A big sort of red flag was when the U.S. cut off Russia from SWIFT, which is like the international wire system. So how you move money around the world, they cut them off from that. And so there's a new system that the BRICS nations. So BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa was the most recent one. Russia. Yeah. It's basically people that want a deal outside of the U.S. dollar that recognize something's been going on with the system. And so the Chinese developed a different wire tool called SIPs, which is their basically way to move money around the world rather than SWIFT. So China's definitely involved somehow. There's a lot of people lining up to take a swing. My opinion is that we need to deal with these European oligarchs first, and then we'll start dealing with China. But hopefully that answers the question.
It does. I think they're not anywhere nearly as economically powerful as they would have us believe in the world market yet.
No, but yeah, they're coming a long way. They are now the manufacturer of the world, and yeah.
That's where Japan used to be in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah, and something really interesting happened in Japan when they started on their uprise. There was, I think it was called the Plaza Accord, where the U.S. dollar was significantly devalued compared to the Japanese yen, and what it did, it was basically a nail in the coffin for the Japanese economy. Now, today, they have a deteriorating demographic, so they're getting older. They have debt to GDP of 250%, which really means take 2.5 years to pay for all their debt if they didn't have any single other dollar, then go to debt. You can see it in the Japanese bond market, where they removed the yield curve control, and the yields on the debt shot up, basically signaling that they don't have faith that the Japanese government's going to continue with that. The Chinese know this, and so they're not going to do the same game that they would let the U.S. did to the Japanese in the 80s with the Plaza Accord. So, Max.
So just a reminder, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll get the microphone to you. The reason being is because we cannot hear you what you say if you are essentially 10 feet away. So next question.
So my understanding of this perverse relationship between London and the United States goes back a long way, ever since American independence, Andrew Jackson, and I understand Trump has a portrait of Jackson, the Federal Reserve, the 1912, G. Edward Griffin, Creature from Jekyll Island, Eustace Mullins, Secrets of the Federal Reserve, where you got this strange relationship of the tail wagging the dog, which is London. Is that really essentially what's going on? It's just a continuation from that period of time?
Yes, and so it's very important to the distinction between the City of London and actually London. So the City of London is just basically a square mile. There is some suggestion that this maybe goes back to the Dutch East India Trading Co. Yeah, but I haven't done any research on that. But E.M. Burlingham has done a significant amount of research on that and thinks the square block within London controls a significant piece of the finances of the world. And if you think about colonialism, so the original colonialism is basically you go and settle in a spot, and then you pillage the natural resources of that spot. So maybe it's wheat, maybe it's oil, maybe it's soybeans, maybe it's beaver pelts, who knows, and then you send it back to the actual colonizer. So you're sending all these products and services back to the home country, as you will. Nothing's changed really, except you're using dollars instead of actual commodities in this case. So it really hasn't changed, and that's why I get very frustrated with people kneeling to the crown, because They're doing the exact same thing that they did 250 years ago. So.
Brett, what's your thoughts on what I think a lot of us in the room believe one of the largest money laundering schemes in the world, all the money that goes to Ukraine? What's your thoughts on that, and how does that affect us?
I'm very careful to try and call this a special operation of Russia, but yet my understanding, and I'm no historian in this area, but I have to be careful. The European Union was an empire builder, and they constantly kept on moving more and more countries within the European Union. NATO's original inception point was around basically keeping communism at bay after World War II. It really hasn't served a purpose of NATO, their original mandate, since the fall of the Soviet Russia. But NATO continued, and they continued to absorb more countries into the European Union, closer and closer to the Russian border. So what I put it the equivalent to is if the U.S. started putting missile silos and experimentation plants in Ukraine that close to the Russian border is effectively the equivalent to Russia putting nuclear missiles on the Mexican border. And in my mind, I don't have any love for Putin. I think he's got a lot of sins, but if the Russians put missile silos pointed at Washington, D.C. on the border in Mexico, you can bet that the U.S. would do something about it. I think Putin was pushed into this situation largely because of that, and completely agree that it is just a money laundering operation. This war was lost a long time ago, and it's just the Western world needs to wake up to that fact. Now that they're starting up the funny business again. I think it's the strait between Finland and what is it? Is that Belarus? Estonia. There's a lot of stuff happening there. It looks like they're trying to start a false flag within that region. It's not over yet in my mind, but they're trying to drag the U.S. into this war, even though Trump has been pretty specific that he wants to be a peacemaker and he doesn't want to be dragged into this war. So, my opinion.
My turn. Hi.
Hi.
What this has helped me to understand, because I'm not an economist, but I kept wondering, why does Trump keep saying, we don't need your oil, we don't need your softwood lumber again today, we don't need your car. It's because, and why has the Liberal government been funneling all of our business to the U.S. only, stifling our outside trade? Well, it's because they want the U.S. dollars.
Yep.
They want the U.S. dollars. So when people are hearing on the news Trump saying these things, I hope they understand now why that is. I wish that it was made more clear, but as you can see from Brett's presentation, it's not such an easy explanation.
No.
It's not such an easy explanation, so I hope I've understood that correctly.
Yeah, and really what you need to know is Trump will not lose control of the U.S. dollar again and effectively do everything in his power to cut off the flow of the U.S. dollars to try and control that system. He did it in Europe, and if he did it in Europe, you can bet that he's going to do it here, which is really troubling that the current federal government is cozying up to the European Union. Yeah.
I have to talk. No, I have to talk sweetly because he said to turn this microphone on, so I just want to, talk really nice to it.
Thanks for doing that.
It's interesting to talk about the impact of this monetary system throughout the world, and I understand it has a significant impact on Canada, and a significant impact on Europe, and an even greater significant impact on the United States as they try to get hold of their economy again.
But my concern right now is I'm hoping with every beat of my heart that in the next 3 to 7 months we have a successful referendum on independence in Alberta. What does this mean to us in Alberta? How do we handle that going forward as an independent country in Alberta in North America?
First, let me state that Bow Valley Credit Union, as an organization, has no stance on the sovereignty of Alberta. Now, that being said, I think you need three things to sort of get this in place if you were to move financially to a new system. Number one, you need a swap line with the U.S. directly with the State Department. And so what a swap line is basically just a line of credit. So if you want to move products and services back and forth across the border, you basically just need, hey, there's this U.S. dollar pool that's sitting there, and you can use that as trade, and it goes up and down, and then maybe you settle it every year or whatever it is type thing. So number one, swap line. Number two, I think you should get a line of credit in place in U.S. dollars with the United States. And so something like $250 billion would be, I think, more than enough. And it would also put a lot of Albertans at ease. And it's like, well, who's going to pay for my CPP, and who's going to pay for my old age security? Who's going to pay for health care? Even though most all of those things are generated within Canada, and we would have the revenue to put in place to be able to do that. Something like a $250 billion line of credit would give people a lot of assurance that there's going to be dollars there when you need it. Number three, my suggestion would be move the Canadian dollars in Alberta to U.S. dollars. And so basically the biggest, even though the U.S. dollar is a dirty shirt, it's the least dirty shirt in the pile compared to every other currency in the world. So it has a better store value. It's more of a medium exchange. You can use it just about everywhere in the world type thing. So day one, my suggestion would be move to the U.S. dollar first. If you think down the road a little bit, then my suggestion would be to try and back the currency, the Alberta buck or whatever you would call it, with precious metals, with gold. Even if it was just 10% or something like that, would go significantly better and really add a lot of credibility to some type of new dollar that you'd have in Alberta. So I think those are sort of things that you need in place day one to not only give people assurances, but be able to continue on with their lives while things are happening in the background.
That's excuse me. That's not. This wouldn't be unprecedented. For example, Panama has used the U.S. dollar as their primary currency ever since they began construction on the Panama Canal. They have their own currency. It's a bolivar. Yep. But basically, they function in U.S. dollars.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason is the U.S. dollar has exactly those what I mentioned. It has a store value, can be used anywhere in the world. It's the world reserve currency. People seek after it, and it's like, and a great example is if you were to go to Indonesia was mentioned. If you were to go to Indonesia and you had your $5 in Canadian and you had your $5 in the U.S., what do you think people would take first? It's 100% of the time they're going to take the U.S. dollars first. They're just going to look at the Canadian dollar and go, "What's that?"
Hey, I had a crew in Colombia that bought booze in the local pub using Canadian Tire money. So.
Oh, there you go. Use Canadian Tire money in the pub. Yeah, that might have more store value than the Canadian dollar.
Do we have any inkling of how much depth there is to the Chinese investment in our resource companies?
I don't have a good sense of that. I would suspect it's pretty significant. It seems to be a lot of influence in my mind. You know, somebody like Cooper might have a better idea around that. What's his first name? Sam Cooper might have a better idea around that. So, no, yeah, that I just haven't done enough research to give a valid answer on that. So,
I'm just the mic runner, but my opinion is freedom first, and we will prosper. Once we get free, there's no doubt we will prosper. freedom first.
Yeah, thanks for that.
You don't have a position on that, though.
I think most people know what color my underwear are, so.
Hi, two-part question. Would it be of any consequence? So that's the first part of my question. And would it be helpful? Does everyone here know that it is we, the Alberta people, that bought and paid for the largest grain terminal in the world, which is Prince Rupert, British Columbia? Does anybody know that? And would that be of any use at all on the world stage?
Let me think about this. So, Albertans paid for that grain terminal. Well, it's definitely would be interesting because it sort of leads to the next question is like how do you get pipelines and railways to that from Alberta? And I don't know the structure of it, but I assume that we still have marginal ownership of it or something like that. So. Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
My wife is trying to shut me up here. She's nudging me saying, give somebody else a chance. But when it comes to things like Prince Rupert, if we are an independent country, the United Nations Convention that provides for corridors from landlocked countries to blue water would take effect, and Canada's a signatory to that particular agreement. So in the event, when you talk about the grain port in Prince Rupert, that would become Alberta property because that corridor that exists for landlocked countries is a 12-kilometer wide corridor, and they also have 12 kilometers of dock space at the other end, which actually becomes the sovereign property of the landlocked country. So we could build, along with the grain handling, we could build a natural gas liquefying station. We could do all sorts of things within that 12-kilometer span of port. So that's one of the things that would have to be negotiated, but it's a very, very real possibility, even a likelihood.
Oh, yeah, I think we have a lot of negotiating, especially with our provinces and territories around this. You know, we could always say to BC, no, you're not allowed to bring the train through Alberta. Yeah. And effectively it cuts it off. Any supply coming from the Vancouver port, which is the majority of the goods in Canada because they come from China. Or you could cut off the oil and gas. But, you know, these are extreme measures that, you know, we would have leverage over. But I just sharing this with you, I find this interesting. So this is from my grade 7 my 12-year-old's social studies class, and I think it's really interesting. So this is provincial and territorial jurisdiction. Colleges and universities, driver's license highways, education, healthcare, municipalities, natural resources, property and civil rights, provincial courts, provincial taxes, and social services. Well, that's a lot. You know, that's the federal government is responsible for citizens and passports. I think we can handle that. Criminal law, yeah, I think we can handle that. Currency, well, I've been talking all night about the problems with the currency. Federal taxes, yeah. Fisheries and oceans, we don't have any. Indigenous lands and rights, I think we can give them a better deal than they're used to right now. National defense, that's maybe something that we would need the United States for. Official languages, yeah, that's easy. Postal service. Don't get me started on that one. And Veterans Affairs, and I think we can do a whole lot better with something like that. And so those are the federal jurisdictions, which I find really interesting. They teach this in grade 7, but we're constantly getting trounced on with them, the federal government, bleeding into the provincial jurisdictions. So. Sure. Yeah. Update on the branch. It's been on the list for a long time. It took a long time to get permitting. It took about 9 months to get permitting in Red Deer. That's where our next branch is. We're hopefully, although we've been delayed twice already with construction, June 7th, we're looking like we'll finish construction. In all realism, we're probably looking to have our doors open for September 1st. This is what we term an agency branch, so it's not a full service branch yet, but it's phase one. We wanted to, because the construction process and the permitting process was taking so long, we wanted to get something in place, so there'll be somebody in a chair in an office that can help people out, and then we'll move on to phase two, which is like cash services and things like that. So in all likelihood, probably September is we're hoping to have that branch open in Red Deer. So, yeah.
I don't know if you can hear me, but can you explain a little bit your backup of gold from your principal operation system as a credit union?
Sure. So the question was, how does the gold work within our organization? So it's multifaceted. What a lot of people are interested in is what is actually backing up my money within the organization, and that's sort of a two-part question. So under the Credit Union Deposit Guarantee Corporation, which is our regulator, they back 100% of your deposits, whether you have $5 or $5 million. Nominally, that will protect your value of your dollars. But as I also talked about tonight, inflation is going to be a big concern in my mind, especially in the next decade. I think we'll wake up in 2030, 2035 and go, wow, that was a very inflationary time. So that's probably what we're trying to protect with that, is the actual real purchasing power of your money. And so with the profits of Bow Valley Credit Union, we buy gold and silver, and it's not on balance sheet, it's actually off balance sheet. So if you actually look at our balance sheet of our organization, it's much stronger than it actually is, because we have that gold and silver in reserve. Now, that's number one. Number two, we have this concept, what's called an e-metals account. So it's fractionalized gold and silver. So if you think of, you have a checking account, a savings account, you also now have the ability to have a gold and silver account, and it's tokenized metal. It's stored for you, it's insured for you, it's vaulted for you, you don't have to worry about it. And you can buy fractional amounts up to 1/100 of an ounce, so that works out to be about $40 worth of gold or 40 cents worth of silver. We store it with our partners, Silver Gold Bull in Calgary, which I like a lot better, because most gold and silver is stored in Brinks in Toronto or somewhere. So I like it in Northwest Calgary a lot better. Northeast Calgary, my mistake. So you can move money back and forth very seamlessly between your e-metals account, so your gold and silver can be your store of value, and you can move it over to your checking account and buy a cup of coffee or whatever you want to do with it. So that's number two. We also have gold and silver lending. So if you have gold and silver already, you can actually lend against it. It works like a HELOC. You can get it for favorable rates of prime, lending against it. If you don't have any gold and silver, you can actually get a loan from us to buy gold and silver. So we're big proponents of precious metals. We are working on Bitcoin as well. If there's more sort of tech savvy people out there, we're looking to do the same idea with Bitcoin as well. So hopefully that helps.
Just Bitcoin or all cryptocurrency?
Just Bitcoin.
What if one has physical gold or silver in their possession? Can they bring it in?
Hold on, I'm just going to give the mic.
Yeah, so I can repeat the question. So if somebody has physical gold and silver in their possession, we're not actual custodians of it. We give that responsibility to Silver Gold Bull, our partners. And so they have much better security, much better inventory, much better vaults than we do. So you could take it to them, inventory it, and then same idea, it just works from there. So, yeah.
I don't want to throw cold water on separation. Alex Craner's talked about England will probably be one of the first to fall. But if Alberta goes and Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the dominoes fall, this, are we not into a very, very dangerous situation in Ontario, Quebec, financially, and civil unrest?
Yeah, I would say so. I think believe it or not, I think Quebec is actually more sustainable financially than Ontario is. They will accept their payments from Alberta every day and twice on Sundays, but I think they're probably much more self-sustaining and probably the original example of sovereignty within Canada. Ontario, not so much. I think they have more of a colonial mentality and try and suck the West dry.
Yeah, them being the colonizers.
Right, yeah.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
I'll have to check in my vehicle, yeah.
So I just have a question. Can you expand on FINTRAC and open banking, please?
Oh boy, okay. How long do you got? So FINTRAC is, a lot of people have probably gone into a financial institution and say, hey, I want to take out $3,000 in cash. And then you get the questions. It's like, what's this for? Where did you get it from? And yeah, I completely agree that it is none of our business. Unfortunately, it's federal law that we have to ask these questions. FINTRAC was, interestingly enough, developed within months of the Twin Towers going down in the United States to try and control terrorism. Draw the lines on that connection. So FINTRAC is basically quite a blunt instrument. I think it's still down. It's been down for about 9 months. We're still obligated to report, but I think it just disappears and goes into the void. I don't think it's been operational, but really all it is just a tracking system. Part of the challenge with FINTRAC is under the Trudeau government in the budget of March of 2023, I think it was, they threw a whole bunch more money at FINTRAC to try and increase its power. They gave it closer ties with the RCMP. They gave it closer ties with government agencies. They were going to throw a whole bunch of AI, artificial intelligence, into it. So it moves from being a very blunt instrument into a very scalpel-like tool with something like that. But the thing is, I think somebody's on our side. If this system has been down for 9 months, I think they might be a ways off from getting it up and running again. Specifically open banking. So the best way I can explain this is when you open up a new accounting software or a budgeting software, one of the first things it wants to do is try and link to your bank account. It says, hey, I can make your life so much easier if we link to your bank account. And right now it uses a technology called screen scraping, and all of it does is if you give it permission, it'll go into your bank account and basically grab numbers and dates and things like that and try and put it in something like an accounting software in a semblance of order. With open banking, the Liberal government, again, was trying to create an open banking framework, which, again, moves it from being a screenscaping tool, a very blunt instrument, into a very scalpel-like tool. And so not only does it go and grab that information from your bank account, but it goes and grabs it from everywhere. Open banking will go and grab it from the CRA, it'll grab it from insurance companies, it'll go grab it from wealth companies, other financial institutions, and what it does is reroutes all that information through a government agency and creates a complete financial picture of you. Isn't that nice? And so with open banking, you can research this in the UK. They have it operational, and it's sitting there largely dormant. They haven't done anything with it. But the thing is, you have to be pretty aware of what's happening. Our organization is not building the infrastructure, so open banking will not be able to get into our organization. But if some of the worst offenders in my mind, ATB are building open banking, TD is building open banking, most of the bigger financial institutions are building open banking. So
please, if you want to talk, please, phone, please. If you want to talk, please, I'm going to give you the microphone because people cannot hear you.
I'm curious to know what your view was regarding the meeting between Trump and Carney following the election.
I thought it was. If you follow me on Twitter, I make fun of it quite a bit. But he came in guns a-blazing, elbows up. We're gonna fight this guy, and wow, did he look pretty subdued in front of him. Part of the issue, I sort of have this, and this is just conjecture a little bit, is these groups around the world are on their back foot, especially with Trump getting into power, with a lot of these, whatever you want to call them, Davos, the cabal, the elite, whatever you want to call them. But part of the challenge is it looks to be that they're going back into hiding. So they're not as brazen, and they're not as easy to spot as they used to be. So is Carney meaning well? I don't know. Is he just gone back into hiding? Maybe.
Hello. Well, I have a couple comments, and I must apologize. Are you done with making your presentation, being as everybody's asking questions?
I hope so.
Okay. Okay, so that part is good. And my second question is, if you do decide to go into cryptocurrencies, because I think this whole international, what's been going on for 100 years or more, obviously, probably since Adam and Eve, is this one world government, and it's like Putin says, whoever controls AI is going to control the world. So are you guys going to look into decentralizing, having decentralized cryptocurrency? Because that would be the only option going forward, don't you think?
Well, yeah, a couple things on comments on that. That's effectively what eMetals is, that account. It's a decentralized currency that it's backed by a hard asset. So it effectively matches cryptocurrencies with a hard asset, and so you can have ease of use as well as store of value right with that. I'm pretty familiar with AI. It's a fairly powerful tool. I've heard of stories where a lot of the jobs, even today, are getting wiped out just because of what it's doing. It'll be really interesting. Is probably the least, the nicest term I could put around it. A lot of jobs out there are pretty repetitive, especially white-collar, paper-pushing jobs type thing, and it might eliminate a lot of those. But part of the challenge I see with something like that is if there's a lot of people that have gone through school and all of a sudden their job is replaced by AI, they're going to be looking for government handouts. And that's when something like universal basic income or central bank digital currencies might come into play, which we have to be keenly aware of. Cryptocurrency, I'm not an expert in that, but I'm most familiar with Bitcoin, and we like it just because it seems to be the safest bet out of all the cryptocurrencies. Until proven otherwise, or until I do enough research, I consider most of the other ones speculative. There's probably something to Tether. There's probably something to XRP. But I don't know enough about them. Sorry, that's best answer I got.
Shut the power off, and none of them are any good.
That's right. Shut the power off. None of them good.
Is Bow Valley moving towards biometrics for authentication?
We have it. You can just opt out. A lot of the other financial institutions force you to use it. We don't. You have the option to use it. Some people really like it. I don't use it, but some people find it easier to use. But it's you have the ability to turn it off, which is good.
I just have a comment. When I first heard about FINTRAC, I went to my one bank And it took me a couple days because I wouldn't answer their question, but I got $10,000 cash, and then I took it over to my other bank to deposit it, and the teller asked me, where did you get this money? And I asked her, what are the consequences of me refusing to answer that question? And she was stunned. So she went and got her manager, who came over and said, well, this is all about keeping you safe. And and I said, well, who would you have asked if I would have deposited this through the ATM? And she was stumped. Like, there's no common sense in most of this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And usually when they try and implement these things, it's always to keep you safe, right? And so that's usually a trigger word for me. It's like, oh, we're keeping you safe. We're keeping you sound. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, unfortunately, it is a federal law, and I've been advocating to the province for, I think, going on year 4 to create our own anti-money laundering FINTRAC. It really hasn't gotten anywhere, unfortunately, but the thing is, I think if our own province was in charge of that type of reporting, it would be a whole lot different than if the feds were, so. Well, the thing is, to not be blacklisted by other trading partners, other countries, you need some kind of anti-money laundering. Unfortunately, it's ingrained within, international payments and things like that right now. So if you didn't have anti-money laundering standards, at least the equivalent to the United States, they wouldn't deal with you. So we're sort of stuck with this, but the thing is, you could make it a lot less intrusive than it is right now, for sure. So, well, yeah, it's a problem. Like I don't agree with any of the tracking, but I used to work in the Cayman Islands, and we had these countries that were on the blacklist, and you couldn't deal with them. The thing is, the last thing you would want is Alberta on that blacklist. So it's like Iraq. You wouldn't be able to trade your oil. You'd get sanctioned. You wouldn't be able to trade. So. Yeah.
And yet it doesn't work.
What's that?
And yet it doesn't work.
Well, no, it doesn't work.
Hey, Brett, you had talked about the information that you sent to the Premier's office. Do you feel like she's on the right track and receptive?
Well, as mentioned, she moved to accepting royalty payments in bitumen, which would effectively do the same thing of getting US dollars out of the system, which is really interesting. I don't know if I can take credit for that, but it is a step in the right direction and shows understanding that you need to get US dollars out of the system to stop this Looney dollar system from happening. Yeah, the Premier's walking a real razor's edge right now, I think. It's been interesting to watch, to try and cater to both people in this room as well as the general normie. We'll see. I think we're going to have to force her hand, though, to some degree, to more conservative direction, if you will.
Yeah, it's been mentioned that we're in a similar situation that we've had for well over 100 years. I've studied a little bit, read some of Alf A.J. Hook, who was the finance minister of Alberta here under the social credit. And some of the challenges he ran into in trying to separate Alberta and give us some independence financially. Do you see now as a better opportunity than we've ever had before to create some financial independence for Alberta?
Yeah, I think probably now is the best time. Granted, I'm only 58 or whatever I said at the beginning. This is probably the best opportunity that we'll get in our lifetimes. There's a lot of unsettlement. So the way I look at it, if you combine all the groups together, APP, say 250,000, you've got the other groups, things like that. It probably makes up about 400,000 Albertans between all the groups combined. My math is you probably need about 1.2 million Albertans to vote for sovereignty. So, you know, it's not unachievable in my mind, especially if we get enough people. And I run in a lot of circles, and there's a lot of business people and individuals in the background that can't support it publicly, but they sure would put their X in the right spot.
Kind of like a
Maybe. But I don't have an opinion.
Hi, I don't want to monopolize the question about the grain terminal, and you answered that nicely. Thank you. I've always been curious, and I'm not clear on this. Okay. Anyway, what is the actual effect of the OPEC countries? And then, because this is just nonsense, like you pay $1.46 per liter today, and then next week it's $1.15 and up, down. Is OPEC actually part of that, more of this fudging that you've mentioned?
Well, a couple of things on that. OPEC is losing a lot of the power that they had previously. You notice how, especially like the Saudi Arabians, are moving towards different investments outside of oil, so they recognize that their reserves won't be around forever. And believe it or not, the United States is the biggest marginal producer of oil and gas in the world, with about 13.5 million barrels. But part of the challenge is once the price of oil gets below about $65, it's uneconomical to do fracking in the Permian Basin, which is by far the biggest oil reserve that they use for fracking in the United States. So I think that's probably why we've seen the Trump administration go and talk to Saudi Arabia, trying to make nice with Russia, who's another big marginal producer, as well as look for other sources of energy. You'll notice even in the last couple of days, the Trump administration announced they're ramping up their nuclear program again. This is a really big chessboard that they're playing against here, and really what it is whoever has the most energy wins. And so they're probably desperately trying to scramble to catch up to China, because it's massive over there, the amount of energy that they're able to produce. So as to OPEC, yeah, as mentioned, I think they're dwindling in power. There is this, specifically you're talking about the gas pump there, it doesn't make a lot of sense why it's swinging up and down like that. I think there is some fudgery going on there. It probably has something to do with industrial carbon tax. It probably has to do with the amount of ethanol and the monopoly that the federal government has on pricing of ethanol, which is not good for your vehicle, by the way. And so if you have a 10% requirement for ethanol in gasoline, but then you charge 50 cents per liter for ethanol additive, you can manipulate the price of the gasoline pretty readily. So.
4-1 Edmonton final.
I'm not announcing that.
4-1 Edmonton final.
Fair enough.
Okay. I just want to thank everybody for having come out tonight. But before we split up here, let's give a big hand of applause for Brett Oland. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. But don't get up and go yet. My friends at the back with the newly formed Central Alberta Municipal Conservatives are starting a very important effort. And I was hoping my friend Tracy could tell you a bit about it. We need to get involved with our municipal politics and school board politics. You've seen the news about those horrible books that are finally coming out of our schools. Getting involved with that group back there will set everything straight.
Well,
Just-
that's
just-
putting a lot on us. I don't know.
Just
For that
briefly, if
organization.
anybody has any questions, I have to get going, but go to our website, Bow Valley Credit Union, and check us out. I'm pretty available. If you go into the contact section, I can have a individual conversation with you. But thanks for having me. Sorry to interrupt.
All right, yeah, I won't take too much of your night here, but I just wanted to mention that I guess I have to stand over here. The reason that we got together as Central Albertans is that, as you know, the municipal elections are coming up this fall, October 20th. I'm sure you're all aware of that. And the left has always been incredibly organized, and they have incredible amounts of money going towards promoting their candidates. And oftentimes they don't even need to do very much to get their candidates elected because not very many people show up to vote. So the reason we got together was just to try and at least have somewhat of an organized effort between our candidates running in our municipalities, not necessarily a slate. Edmonton and Calgary are allowed to do parties, we're not yet. And so we started thinking, well, how can we get information to people about who the candidates even are on the ballot? Because a lot of times in municipal elections you get there and you look down the names and you're like, I kind of recognize that person's name from a business somewhere, right? So as Conservatives, we're not typically doing everybody okay? A great job of letting people know what values we're running on. Most of Central Alberta tends to vote Conservative when it comes to provincial politics, and yet somehow all our school boards and councils seem to be run by the left. So we're trying to do a better job organizing. Right now we're looking for good, strong candidates to put their names forward, willing to step out. I know that's not always a fun task, but if you know anyone or if you are somebody that's looking to run, we're trying to pair them up with other people so they don't feel like they're doing it on their own as well. So we're a support network for candidates, but also we're recruiting volunteers. If you don't feel that running is your strength, but you can help do some door knocking, make phone calls, even just send out an email that we send you to other people. As candidates are announcing, we'll be keeping track of what their values are. We'll be sending them out questionnaires. Right now, our main center is our Facebook page, just Central Alberta Municipal Conservatives on Facebook. If you can join the group and share that, we want to build awareness. So if you have any questions or want to sign up to help volunteer or know somebody, come grab a pamphlet and come ask us any questions you have at the back on your way out. So thanks.